We use a different chemical process, but it is every bit as pure.
Oh, tight, yeah!
What is up, guys, and welcome to my third ever video response to somebody. At this rate, it's just one per year. You should enjoy it while it lasts. And we are responding to, it's 3 for 3 now. First time was Terminator, second time was not Pharaoh, second time was Andy, and now it's Resonance. It's Resonance turn. There's nothing particularly offensive in this video, I should say. It's not it's not like Andy's video that we covered 1 year ago, but it's just enough. There's just enough slop over here, repetitive slop, that it gets really jarring to watch. And I decided, and in this video, Resonant is talking about, you guessed it, Total War, Pharaoh, Dynasties, and just as it seems to be the want of the internet currently, it's time to massively hype up this re-release, just to overblow what would have been a decent update in another game into a full-blown re-release. At least they didn't have like the guts to call this a game of the year or Ultimate Edition and just gave it another name like Dynasties. But whatever, let's see what he has to say about it. And I have my notes ready right now, and he's going to stand trial, so let's get right on into it.
As someone that is so quick to criticize Creative Assembly when things go wrong with the series, I thought it would be time to give them some praise. Because the newest Total War game has just released, and it is incredible. Something that I never thought that I would see, and something that Creative Assembly have never done before.
Now, this is a common thing with these YouTubers. They constantly switch roles between either advocating for CA or being the voice of the community. It depends on the season, really. And I just decided to go through a bit of his video catalog and see like what other stances he was taking. And surprise, surprise, or maybe not, I find that in the video where he's talking about the removal of naval battles, he says, is it really worth criticizing CA and calling this a bad decision in that video? And yes, I think it's a little bit harsh.
So it's completely down to Creative Assembly not bothering or wanting to put the resources in, right? Well, no. I think that's a little bit harsh.
So he's not exactly quick to criticize Creative Assembly, because in the case where they got rid of naval battles, which was one of the most heavily marketed features of Total War probably ever for a new game when it came to Empire, that was such a big part of the marketing material. They made such a big deal about collaborating, I don't know, with the Royal Navy, whatever, War Museum or whatever, just to make sure that they depicted everything, like physically they managed to depict the physics and the ballistics accurately. They went and put in all that effort, and then they barely did anything with it for a few games. It was actually one of the better parts of Empire. Like there was the naval battles were actually one of the good parts of that game. They were pretty well executed. Napoleon carried that on. Shogun 2 is just really let down by the fact that they made fire arrows way too powerful and they handed it over to the cheapest ship. So it just ruined the balance. And then there's the fact that the AI was just completely broken in naval battles. But Fall of the Samurai mostly corrected that. It made ship combat engaging again. It definitely took the balance in the right direction. And in terms of production values, they were all really well handled. It was just classic Total War. The spectacle was there, the tactics were there. The battle AI in Fall of the Samurai is not nearly as egregiously bad as the one in Shogun 2. But they were doing something with it. It was an interesting, worthwhile part of the game. There were some issues like how it was mostly strategically pointless. Basically in Empire, Napoleon, Shogun 2, it was strategically pointless because you only needed to use it to transport units between continents or between different land masses, and once you did that, you could just scupper the ship. It was no longer of any use. Fall of the Samurai actually solved that somewhat, alleviated that somewhat by introducing naval bombardments, which gave an actual reason to keep your navies afloat, to actually use navies throughout the game and maintain them. There was naval bombardments. The fact that movement over land was also quite slow, so there was an actual reason to use naval transport and to keep your ships. The fact that the ships were also really expensive, which really helped to curb the AI's ability to spam navies, which was a problem in Shogun 2. and also made the encounters just way more decisive. But then they just upped, like, after Rome 2 is just disastrous naval battles with just how buggy the boarding was, and with how buggy both the boarding was and how the combined land and naval battles were extremely buggy, and then they just dropped it later on. I think that's a pretty strong point against them. If there's anything that's worth criticizing in them taking, going forward one step and then taking 3 steps backward, it's that. He also, Resonant also had the kindness to hype up Troy Mythos for them, even though it was a big part of that game's marketing material, the truth behind the myth. So they realized that didn't work. They realized that historical fans, as loud as they are, aren't very numerous, and they really don't tend to buy their Total War games. Thrones of Britannia, Troy, Pharaoh now, historical fans really aren't showing up despite all the noise they're making up online. So they realized that didn't work, and they decided to backpedal on that whole thing. Let's just throw in the monsters. Fine. And he said that was a great thing. It's doing something incredible with Troy. It's 0 for him being a critic, and 2 for him watering down his criticism and pulling his punches. And there's, of course, now the fact that he's praising CA for what can only be described as a modest update. It's certainly not something that can be blown up into a full game. They literally just expanded the map and added more factions to it, which was standard. Independent modders could do that in the past before they started locking their games down from modding. And I don't usually speak favorably of modding. Like, I don't mod my games. I stick my critiques to the actual vanilla game, the version widely available to everyone else, and that will have the largest segment of the player base would have a collective experience in, so they know what I'm talking about. And also, I should not forget, he also pulled his punches in the 3K cancellation video, and they were clearly in the wrong after squandering one of their largest releases. There's always, even when he has something, like he's about to give them the punch and make the point, he always comes back with, but maybe, I'm interested to see what they'll do next, to it's just, can't really go all that way. I don't want to be too mean.
You might recognize this trailer, and it was quite well praised when it first came out.
Except the trailer really was not well praised. Even people who were hopeful for the game were kind of lukewarm on it, I remember.
Then when a Total War Pharaoh actually released, well, it was somewhat of a disaster. But this is Total War Dynasties, almost an entirely new game, and the biggest historical title that Creative Assembly have ever released. As you can see, quite a lot is new, so we're going to jump straight into this.
The word almost is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, because it's almost like there's a subconscious understanding that this is in fact not a new entry. It is at best a modest expansion, or just a modest expansion for a reskin of Troy, which is itself a reskin of Warhammer, which was itself a reskin of Attila, and then Rome 2 all goes back to that game. So almost really good on you to include that word over there.
75 gigabytes of new content within a Total War game. And as mentioned, this is the biggest historical Total War game to date, and it is a true Bronze Age Total War.
I'm aware what I'm going to say next is going to piss a lot of the Total War Pharaoh diehards, all 7 of them, but to be fair, I think they kind of deserve what they're getting now. I think the world would be a better place if we brought back a healthy dose of bullying. Either way, I make no secret, I make no secret of the fact that I both hate and find fascinating this never-ending obsession that Total War fanboys have with counting factions, just counting factions, counting units, making their inventory checks. Like they're the kind of people who dream about Microsoft Excel.
They've redeemed themselves past what anybody expected with the Total War Pharaoh.
They have not. They have made one valiant attempt to fix the battles, but that only introduced its own problems, lethality. For those of you who don't know the whole lethality thing and whatever, well, Total War from Shogun 1 all the way to Fall of the Samurai used something called the hit point system. Basically, each and every soldier in the unit had 1 hit point, and they would either take a hit and die or would outright dodge it or block it. There was no 17,000 hit points for this unit like a health bar, and you're watching it slowly trickle down. If a soldier gets hit, he's dead. There were some exceptions to that rule, but generally he was dead. And that's why like even newer Total War fans, when they go to try out the older games, they're taken aback by just how fast the combat is and just how impactful the charges is, and they wonder why. Is it just nostalgia? No, it's really because the underlying mechanics make it so that those actions have actual impact. And what Rome 2 did is it gave us the health bar system. Now, instead of each man standing for 1 hit point, they have multiple hit points. There's a health bar attached to the unit. It takes multiple hits. It takes multiple hits to kill a man. So you watch a unit take 3 archer volleys, nothing happens, and then suddenly the 4th volley kills like 7 soldiers. Cavalry charges at the beginning of battle don't seem to do anything to units. It's still the same over here in Pharaoh after all these years. They're still using the same system. And so they brought this lethality, which is, mind you, a reintroduction of critical hits from Thrones of Britannia. That game tried something similar, so it's not even a new thing. And it's on the surface, it looks like a good thing, but I tested it on default. It doesn't really have much of an effect. On 100%, what 100% does is it basically makes all successful hits into lethal blows, so they just die outright, which sounds fine. It means charges are impactful. It means cavalry suddenly have a use, but it also completely messes with height advantage because this wasn't thought through properly, because what it really means is that units charging uphill do an unreasonable amount of damage to the unit that supposedly has height advantage.
And I don't even think it's called a Sagas game anymore, since, well, that's kind of what the Dynasties subtitle means.
Now, if you're easily wooed by marketing and branding techniques and smoke screens, you may be missing the problem here. The Saga lineup of games, Saga lineup of games is a neat little smokescreen to excuse CA's desire to release games on a yearly basis. The supposed justification for having a tentpole and then a Saga game is that the Saga games allow them to test out new features that may potentially be included in the tentpole releases. But that's really not what's happening here. It really is just an excuse to release the same full-priced game year after year. There haven't been any substantial changes to the combat. It's still using the same health bar system. That's to do with the combat, though. On the campaign, it gets even worse. They're still using the same army general system from Rome 2, where you can't detach units from armies. They're stuck to generals, so it just restricts how you can divide your forces. You can't smartly divide your forces in a manner where you can bolster a garrison with 2 really good units just to support the garrison. Instead, you have to devote an entire army. You have to recruit a general, which adds another cost to it. And then the unit is stuck to that general forever. You either have to march the general and the unit somewhere else if you want to use them for something else, or just disband them outright. You can't just split units off and okay, your job's done here, let's move you over to this front where you're more needed. Nothing fundamentally has changed with these games, whether they're Saga or tentpole releases. Overall, though, tentpole or Saga, it's a distinction without a difference. Whether Pharaoh is a Saga game or not, the fact that it isn't a Saga anymore does not matter. And I think if you're going to be a reviewer, which I think it seems you're positioning yourself as one, Resonant, I think you should be good enough to not fall for these marketing tactics.
Now, you can play Pharaoh or Pharaoh's Dynasties. I don't see any reason why you'd play the original Pharaoh anymore, but hey, it's there if you really want to. There are new territories like Western Greece and Mesopotamia. Yes, you now have Greece and Egypt, and so much more within the same Bronze Age game. It is the biggest campaign map of any historical Total War, with now 349 settlements within the game. That is absolutely insane. I mean, this update added in itself 168 of these settlements for complete free.
I don't really have much to add here other than it's just more inventory checks and just counting stuff without assessing if the game's actually better for it. But I also like to add, if you're one of the few 1,000 people who got Troy for money on Steam, I can imagine how bad you feel right now. You have to pay another $40 to get, if you didn't already get Pharaoh, you have to pay another $40 to get access to all this stuff again. It's kind of like Warhammer, where you have to, if you want to access everything in Warhammer 3, you need to buy Warhammer 1. It's just so insane. It's insane that they do that, and it's insane that Total War fans are just like, they're frog boils to the point that it's just okay that, yeah, that's the cost of entry, man. Make way for the paying customers.
If you have Total War Pharaoh, this is just the new game now, with 95 new factions and 39 of them playable, everything from major to minor factions, with over 150 reworked and new units. So you've got your regular Egyptian factions, as we've already had, but oh look, now we've got Troy.
Or as I like to say, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one around to hear it, did it really make a noise? Because again, it's inventory checks. It's telling you nothing about the quality of the game. It annoys me to no end right now that so many Total War fans seem to just lack the mental faculty to grasp this basic concept. Like, yeah, quality over quantity. A high school introduction to ethics, or I guess, like, you never heard of that. And I still get comments to this day pointing out, like, stating, X game has this many units or this many factions, thinking that this is like some slam dunk response. And it gets even more frustrating when I actually preempt these responses and explain why these arguments are nonsense in the video, and they just out themselves as having not watched it, or just talking, like they're just talking past me at that point. At the end of the day, I would rather have 4 multi-dimensional, multifunctional units than 150, which I'll only end up using 2 or 3 of. Now, I know what some of you are going to say, well, wasn't this a problem in other Total War games? Wasn't Yadayashi Gado and Shogun 2, Line Infantry in Fall of the Samurai, Line Infantry in Empire Total War, weren't those like centralizing units on the gameplay? Well, yeah, I would agree, but then this is just an exercise in whataboutism. Those games came out 14 years ago, and are you implying it's okay that we're just getting the same thing 14 years ago, 14 years later, 14 years later, we're getting the same game sold to you? Is that what matters? That it's okay so long as it's the same thing? Like, the past was the same thing?
Yes, you've got Hector from Total War Troy, Paris from Troy, Priam, all the characters from the game. They've pretty much merged the 2 games together for absolute free. You don't have to own Troy for this, by the way.
Again, it would have been great if they did this in, say, Warhammer, where you didn't need to buy like the first 2 games to be able to access everything in the 3rd game. All right, just interjecting over here because I need to clarify. I'm aware that this is no longer the case with regards to Warhammer 3, but I think that this was the case at any point in time where you need to buy. I don't think it's very common in the industry in general, and the gaming industry, as bad as it is and as egregious as the monetization and nickel and diming is in this industry. I still think it's pretty insane that at any point in time it was considered acceptable that you need to buy 2 full games, 2 other full games in order to access all of the stuff in this current game that was just released when Warhammer 3 was launched. And I don't think, even if CA took their foot off the pedal on that matter, I don't think it's definitely not something I'm gonna praise them for. Like, yeah, thank you, my generous master, for not forcing me to spend, I don't know, northwards of $200 just to access all the stuff in this already full priced game. It does not reflect very favorably on CA being this generous, magnanimous corporation, or whatever these fanboys are portraying it to be. Do people, they're praising CA for being so kind over here, but do they have Alzheimer's? They went and praised CA for being so generous with Troy, being free on Epic, even though that was an Epic exclusivity deal, and who knows how much money they made off of that from Epic. It's not exactly charitable. Only for CA then to also can 3K. Sell Warhammer 3 for full price when it was broken on launch. Sell Pharaoh for full price despite being a reskin in a long line of reskins. Their track record for generosity isn't exactly stellar, and I wouldn't be so rushed to. I wouldn't be in such a rush to think, hey, maybe they're finally have a change of heart. It's like, are they an addict who's definitely stating they've come clean now and they won't do it again? I don't think that's the case over here, guys. It's really tough for me to decide if these YouTubers and their wider fans are just oblivious to the past or they're being straight up dishonest.
This is just part of what Pharaohs is now, with so many more factions. I mean, it is absolutely incredible. We've got Agamemnon here as well, Odysseus, Achilles. He is playable within the game. Look at this fella. I actually can't believe they've done this. I genuinely cannot believe that CA Sophia have gone this far. So when we look at the campaign, we can get a good look at everything that's going on. We've got Egypt, we've got the Hatti, and then we start to get to the sea people, which we'll talk about a little bit later, Mesopotamia as well, and the Aegean, if that's something you want to look at. And you can see at the map exactly where people start. So for example, if I wanted to be Priam of Troy, we can click on say Priam, or we could be Agamemnon as well. But then we've also got our minor factions as well within all of it, which is why I mentioned that there are 95 new factions within this. Granted, not all of them are playable, but places like Thrace, I never thought I'd see within Pharaoh. And this is for pretty much every single one of the major factions. I think there are plenty.
So we're getting another long inventory check, and that's just a theme in this video. It's familiar. It's a theme in all of the Total War content creator. There's a very consistent theme because they have to get these videos out so quickly, and I'm one of the few YouTubers who makes the cardinal sin of playing the games he's talking about. What can you expect from them if they're trying to work on the schedule? And he even admits later on in the video that the Dynasties was released just now and he didn't have any early access. He has to push the video out now, and that means inventory check. We're just gonna read their press release. And on that topic, does anyone remember like the total conversion mods for Medieval 2 or the total like NTW3, like all those mods? Any of the expanded map mods for the older Total War games? I normally don't talk about modding in my discussions. I mentioned earlier because I like sticking the discussion to the base game. That's the one that people are most familiar with, and opening up the modding discussion is just like opening up the floodgates. Like, where do you stop? How many mods do you include? Which mod is the quintessential mod? What's the quintessential experience? I'd rather head that off of the past and say vanilla only. But it's still worth pointing out, this is stuff that modders did regularly. On top of that, they took nearly 9 months to release this on top of that. And this is something you only get after having paid the initial fee for the game that was just unfinished at launch and carrying the same terrible design decisions that they've carried forward for 10 years or more.
Can you tell that I'm kind of blown away by all of this? And once again, your general Egypt factions. It is a true Bronze Age Total War, kind of combining the best parts of Troy and Pharaoh together, but once again, those games still exist in their current playable state, although they were not very successful in their playable state, so I don't exactly know why you'd do this. But it's all together in one huge free update. It's crazy that when Total War was perhaps in its darkest point in the franchise history, that they did the biggest thing they ever have to try and get out of it. Even bigger than the revival of Rome 2.
But what does this add to the game, though, like qualitatively? This is another case of rewriting history by just omitting details. Rome 2's revival is pretty much an anomaly in the series history. No other game has gotten the rescue operation that Rome 2 had, and maybe they're still releasing patches or updates for that game, who knows. The list of abandoned games is a lot longer. There's Empire, which they then resold as Napoleon not even a year later. I don't remember. Then there's Thrones of Britannia. How many of you remember that? There's Troy. Three Kingdoms, which was a huge sales success on launch. They canned it, 2 years after it was launched, barely. Again, let's look past the headlines to the actual details. The bulk of the changes in this Pharaoh Dynasties update, re-release, whatever you want to call it, it just comes down to expanded map and more factions. Like that, again, this was something that would have been... they had similar updates, like with a region expand, like a map expand in Three Kingdoms. They didn't have nearly as much fanfare over this. This is not something revolutionary. But to be clear, expanded maps and more factions aren't strictly a bad thing. I'm not saying they're bad in their own right, but they're just a neutral change. They don't, on their own, they really don't tell me much about how good the game is or how worthwhile it is. Especially since other major... What does matter, though, is that other issues have largely gone unsolved. The building and tech tree is just a convoluted mess where it's just you're amassing stat modifiers. It's as uninteresting as ever. And the UI is just... I don't know if it's a competition between this and Three Kingdoms for having the worst UI. You've got just muddy icons. It's difficult to find out. Like, you have to go through all these different tooltips, all these different menus. If you want to find out what units a military building, like what garrison units a military building adds, you have to first right click on the building, like the potential building you can build, and then it takes you to the building tree, and then you need to right click on that, and it finally takes you to the encyclopedia, and the game lags for like 10 or 15 frames on each one of these because it's so poorly optimized. It just feels unfinished and very, very just unoptimized.
Sophia have spent months and months working on this, completely transforming the worst Total War game to maybe one of the best.
Now that he's mentioned Sophia, there's this very weird narrative, among many weird narratives, that Total War players have just conjured up. I don't know where it came from. This image of Sophia being the underdog fighting big, bad, evil C.A. Horsham. And I think that this is based on their recent like promotional material for Dynasties where they're interviewing the devs. I think CA is retroactively like hijacking this narrative for themselves, if only to like cynically earn some goodwill with the fans because of how gullible they are, just by giving them the impressions that things are meaningfully changing. Oh, look at these developers, aren't they so nice and innocent and well-meaning? They're just like me and you. But like, you have to remember this whole tug of war between Sophia and Horsham. This isn't some medieval English king trying to keep some distant vassal under his thumbs, you know, with the limitations of communications in that day. This is a modern company. It's the headquarters always calling the shots on the important decisions at the end of the day. Whatever Sophia does, it's Horsham that's calling the shots. Okay, if Horsham doesn't like something, it's not getting published. If Sega doesn't like something, it's not getting published. There's really not much the developers at Sophia can do.
Okay, so let's say I want to play as a minor faction over here. Let's go with the Boeotians. Oh look, they've all got their own custom troops. That's pretty cool. And of course you've got your faction troops.
It's common for the newest releases to be showered with praise for, oh, look at all these factions, all these units, but when you really get down to it, you're still dealing with the same unit classes. You still have spear infantry, sword infantry. You have light versions of those. You have light cavalry, medium cavalry, light archers, light archers and medium archers. There's nothing radically different over here. You're still dealing with the same classes. The only thing that's changed is that each individual class is more heavily bloated with increments of like 50 gold or whatever, or 50 food to the next unit. It's not good design. Unit balancing is not... This is not good unit balancing where you're just getting access to better units. They're just better, more expensive, but they're just better in every way. It's much better when each individual unit has its own specialist role that allows it to remain viable to differing degrees throughout the campaign. And before you misinterpret what I'm saying, I'm again not implying that the older Total War games had this down perfectly or didn't have any issues or they were issue-free when it came to unit balancing. They had their issues, but some did it better. Some of them did it better than others, and Pharaoh isn't one of those better ones. Archers have been made far too effective, like far too good to this update, and Greek archers can go toe-to-toe with dedicated melee infantry in close quarters, which is obviously not a good thing. Then there's cavalry. I've been very insightfully told that cavalry being flaccid in this game is perfectly alright, since it's just, it's in line with history. And to put what I'm saying into perspective, Three Kingdoms, at least on launch, I know before they abandoned, they canned support for that game. They had one pretty significant battle update where they toned down the effectiveness of cavalry. But that game was very cavalry-centric for the longest time, and do you really think that was based on history when that time period, most Chinese armies, the Han Chinese army was, or Han Chinese warfare, in that time in Chinese history, the warfare was dominated by large armies of conscript foot soldiers and not cavalry. They weren't at the center of the show. So what gives over there was that, were they trying to be historically accurate there? You just can't try and base your arguments over reading the Tempest in a teacup. Okay, you can't. People are just desperately looking for patterns and how they make their decisions when there are just few. The only thing that's consistent is that they just seem to be clueless. Then there's the fact that they marketed Troy as truth behind the myth. I won't let this one go away, and then they shoved all those mythological creatures in there. Am I supposed to believe that mythological creatures like the Minotaur are okay and Pharaoh? I'm sorry, I meant Troy, but effective cavalry are too much for Pharaoh.
Let's jump straight into it. Okay, so now that we're on the map, we can get a good look of it, and it looks as gorgeous as ever. Now, as much as I'm not a huge fan of Pharaoh and Troy, in fact, I think Troy is a pretty awful looking game, I think a lot of the work they put into, especially things like the water and the brightness of it, I really, really do love.
He does touch on a very important point here. Despite the whole don't care, looks cool philosophy that a lot of Total War players seem to have, the games haven't really gotten much, they haven't really gone much farther graphically or artistically since 2011, 2012. Look at the way gunpowder was last seen in Fall of the Samurai, and then look at the way gunpowder units were handled in Warhammer 3, even the Empire, which is a pike and shot centric faction in the lore, is just has really pitiful gunplay. Like the sound effects are just completely muted. You can't even hear them at maximum camera height. The bullets travel in arc trajectories, like 70 meters maybe, which would not be the range even of black powder matchlocks. There's barely any smoke generated. The same thing with arrows. You have those horrible missile trails, and they're all very low velocity. They have not gotten better, and it's the same thing with like missiles and both slingers and archers in Pharaoh. They're still using ugly missile trails, and I know you can turn them off, but if you do turn them off, you can no longer see them. That wasn't the case in older games. They didn't have ugly missile trails, but you could actually still see the arrow models flying in the distance. It's also particularly bad. I remember specifically, I could not play 3K for more than maybe 30 minutes at a time without my eyes hurting, because there was something about the campaign graphics, the textures. It made everything so hard to look at, so muddy. The towns were so difficult to see, which is probably why they cluttered the screen with all those obnoxious icons. And in any case, I think that graphical improvements are such low-hanging fruits when it comes to praising modern games. We're long past the point where games or where technology allows games to look photorealistic or near photorealistic, that I really don't think it's just a non-point.
The UI still, is not my favorite.
I also like how he just casually skips over one of the bigger and most immediately, this is one of the problems that people almost immediately notice with Pharaoh. It's something that the update has not even addressed. It's the UI. It's the atrocious UI. They clutter your screen. They simultaneously clutter your screen with so much crap, but it's also really difficult to find the stuff that you actually need. The building tree, I think, is probably the biggest offender, because, as I mentioned, you have to click 3 times. You have to click on the building. You have to, in the actual building management menu, when you're clicking on the problems, you have to click on the building, then it takes you to the building tree, and then if you want to get the actual details, especially for military buildings, you want to see what garrison is being offered. That's kind of important. You have to click and then go to the encyclopedia, which is all, again, just very poorly optimized. There's also the fact that the UI is being asked to do too much work. The UI, the problems with the UI are also a symptom of another problem, is that the overall, the overarching design philosophy, everything is just so abstract with the technology tree. You remember the first technology tree in Empire? Yes, Empire. That game had a pretty good technology tree. It was pretty well thought out, especially for a first attempt. Most of the technologies, especially the military technologies, were self-explanatory. You had fire by rank, that's self-explanatory. There was platoon fire. There was socket bayonets, plug bayonets. There were modifiers, you could go and read for more details, but you got a general idea of, okay, plug bayonet, that unlocks bayonets. But when you go to the technology tree in Pharaoh, and it's the same for just New Total War in general, it's very, very heavily abstracted. It's difficult to tell to weigh 2 texts against each other, because it's all just modifiers and modifiers plus 75 to experience over here per turn, plus 25 over here. You remember Revolver Cavalry in Fall of the Samurai? Oh, it unlocks Revolver Cavalry. Arms deals, it unlocks more advanced gunpowder units, like Parrot guns, sharpshooters. Carbine Cavalry text unlocks Carbine Cavalry. Explosive shells unlocks explosive shells. The UI, there wasn't a need for such a convoluted UI, because things were self-explanatory for the most part. They made sense.
But we've got Fog of War at the moment, yet the map stretches miles and miles, miles and miles. I mean, we can get all the way down to south of the Nile as well, which is absolutely incredible. So you might be thinking,
it is impressive on its own, maybe, how large this map is, both in terms of the province count and just the scale of it. But it's too bad that the game just can't take advantage of it. The way the systems are designed, with how units are tied to generals and you can't split them off, it really, really just massively kneecaps what you can do with it. For one, you can't effectively defend your provinces, especially the ones that don't even have walls, minor settlements. You can't defend them effectively. You can't just leave a few garrison units here and there. You can't split off units to scout. That was a pretty major deal in older Total War games. You could split a unit off for an army, send it up ahead, check out what's going on. It would be very important in this game with how huge the map is. You don't want to walk that long and find yourself fighting a 1 to 4 stack battle.
Okay, surely the map is too big.
Yeah, the map is too big. I mean, combined with the army system. Yeah, most settlements lacking proper defenses. That's nothing really new right at this point.
Well, you can see these waterways here, and actually these are going to be very useful and come in handy because this is how we get between the areas in good speed. You can move between these waterways incredibly fast, and that's really going to help you get around and make sure that you're not stuck in one area, because I think that was one of the issues with like Total War, Warhammer 3, and especially Immortal Empires. The maps are so big, and there's not really ways to get through areas very fast unless you're using tunnels and sort of stuff like that.
All very true. They've bloated maps like far beyond the game's ability to cope with it, and turn times are also pretty obnoxious. I can't imagine if I was on a worse computer. My computer's pretty good. I can't imagine what it would be like playing this on worse hardware. It would be just atrocious.
The troops as well have had a big overhaul. The battles have completely changed. Of course, we've got new troops and cavalry that have come in as well. Combat feels way heavier and more impactful. It feels like you're fighting a proper battle.
Completely changed is a bit of an overstatement. You know, the problem with making absolute claims like completely like that, it's quite easy to falsify them. If Andy's take taught me anything, it's that the only way to never open yourself up to scrutiny is to never make a point in the first place. Let's get over the 3 major changes. There's lethality, projectile controls, and cavalry. Lethality at default settings is just negligible. It doesn't seem to have any effect. I ran 2 unit tests back to back, one with lethality off and at default, and I noticed a slight change on the charge, but that was it. In fact, I think the time that I tested it with lethality on default, somehow the fight resolved faster. Somehow the fight dissolved faster when it was off rather than when it was on default. So you might think, okay, 100%, yeah, charges start to have some impact. But again, it messes with height advantage because it's very difficult now to avoid giving, like, it's very difficult to place your melee infantry in a position where they won't take unacceptable losses in return from worse quality units, especially with the bonuses that the AI gets on higher difficulties. And then it also plays into how archers are just way too good. If the enemy doesn't have any good ranged units, archers are just so obnoxiously good because now suddenly a lot of their hits are no longer doing chip damage, just outright killing. What about the projectile controls? You know, arcing shots versus direct fire. I ran tests with archers, you know, doing it manually. It's like switching between direct fire and plunging fire. And I found that it's just not worth taking control. It's much better. It's not worth the micromanagement to keep on shifting between arcing and plunging. It's much better to just leave it on auto. The auto firing system does a good enough job. If you really want to do more damage, it's much better to run your archers around on the flank and where they have clear line of sight to actually directly fire rather than just toggling the button. Finally, cavalry. Cavalry on default settings, which I assume most people are going to be playing on, are just really impotent on the charge.
And I cannot wait to experience this more, especially when it comes to multiplayer.
I tried the multiplayer. I'm probably one of the few, like the 15 people who tried it. I tried it the day, literally the day after launch. It crashed my system, hard to desktop, by the way. But this time I couldn't find anyone on quick play, and I found maybe 5 lobbies. I joined one. The guy there was just so impatient. I don't know, maybe he was waiting 5 hours for someone to join his lobby. So he left without waiting for me to finish my army, and nobody came to play with me. It's honestly a joke at this point, like a really good joke, the best joke that this franchise has delivered. That people still take multiplayer seriously in these discussions.
Because once again, this has literally just released. I'm recording it about 10 minutes after it's unlocked on Steam, and whilst some people did get early access to it, I think I've been too mean to Creative Assembly in the past, so I definitely didn't.
Well, tough luck. If that's so, I guess you may have actually been doing your job.
Right, let's put our lads over here. Let's get them out in the open. Lovely. Everything seems very, very responsive, which is better than the last time I remember playing this game. Like, it just, I played it on release and it was just the clunkiest thing in the world.
Yeah, other than the hard to desktop crash, you know, that the hard crashed desktop that I had with multiplayer. The game, I remember it crashed my stream at one point, and I think I had to restart my whole system. So there's that. It also broke Battlefield 1, a completely unrelated game, by installing a different Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio Code package or whatever. And I spent months trying to fix that, and I realized this game stopped working in about October, and the only new game I got was Pharaoh in October. And I will never forgive CA for that. They made me download the digital equivalent of an IED.
But goddamn, they look sexy as hell. Whoa, look at those bronze shields. I mean, it's been so long since we've had a proper good historical Total War, and they've actually done it. But I mean, if you're looking for historically accurate arms and armor, okay, you're still going to be wanting more. And in that case, it's probably not the right thing for you.
Is it any surprise that they just keep on bloating the games when this is exactly what their fanboys are falling over? This was something that modders could do in an afternoon back before they locked these games down, and they also weren't asking $40 to buy a reskin of multiple games, of multiple reskins.
My biggest gripe with Troy, and even Pharaoh to some extent, especially Troy though, I was really looking forward to that game. I was looking forward to something that was similar to a Rome 2 in terms of its feel, but we never got that. And this feels like now they've put it in with Pharaoh, they've had the combat overhauls.
It's both amusing and disturbing to see us get to a point where make this game like Rome 2 is the standard we're aiming for. To me, it sounds like a threat. And let me run a clip over here. This is what Rome 2 looks like as of last year. And this is what passes for okay in these people's mindset. If you mistook this for Pharaoh or Troy with how if you just mistook this for Pharaoh or Troy, that's how impactless like the combat is, you would be forgiven.
That have, changed the way that people fight. It really does feel like it's what Troy was supposed to be. It really feels like it's what Pharaoh was supposed to be. Sure, they didn't get it right first time, but they've definitely got it right this time.
Just remember that this guy was saying they were doing something incredible with Troy with the Mythos update. I guess we can all change our minds, or maybe we hoped you didn't notice. I can't wait for history to rewrite itself with these guys saying that whatever Total War comes out next is what Pharaoh should have been all along.
Which, better late than ever. I think that still works, especially when they've tried so hard with this. And you can tell that so much love and passion, and for no real gain. I mean, people have already bought the game. Is it likely that this could revive the game? Possibly. I think we might see a temporary player spike.
The player spike he's referring to, last I checked, last I checked on Steam charts, was 6,500 players daily peak, which is less than Total War 3 Kingdoms, a 5-year-old game at this point that was unceremoniously shot by CA, so there's that. Also, I really doubt this can be considered a lot of work in technical terms, like game development terms. This is the type of thing independent modders could do. I really doubt they had anything more than a skeleton crew working on this, given it's been like a full 9 months since that release, since the game's full release.
At least. But there's no one buying this. It's a free update. So if you already own Pharaoh, you get the game anyway. There is very little that I can criticize about a company that puts that amount of effort, even if, well, it's something they probably should have done in the first place.
No, that last part's a blazing hot take. Yeah, maybe we should be holding them to a standard that is anything higher than, wow, they just added 87,000 factions to the game, and look, these Habiru raiders are wearing the correct type of historically accurate sandals.
But that brings you on to why. Why did it not go so well to start with, and what happened? I think this is down to creative assembly rather than the individual developers.
This narrative also seems to run in parallel with the big bad Horsham and the small good Sophia fighting valiantly for us. I have a sense that it goes both ways. Leadership is definitely the one calling the shots on marketing, pricing, the DLC model. But a lot of the finer details, the features that... But a lot of the finer details, like features that worked fine, that were just removed for no reason or replaced with something worse, hit points being replaced with health bars, archers in this game being too good, charges in general still looking really bad, animations just being worse or straight up missing. And then there's also the awful UI. I find it hard to assume that leadership is the one responsible for that. It really seems like the devs just lower down. They just have no idea what they're doing. or just nobody's playtesting anything. That the UI especially is something that would be caught, you know, being really bad, because it's very easy if you're a UI designer or you're one of the grunts, you know, doing game development work, for you to have tunnel vision and like, yeah, this makes sense to me, you know, like all of this makes sense. What's the problem? That's why you get someone external, someone from a different team, someone from outside to playtest the game, because they will, you know, they're very likely to highlight problems that you may not have noticed. That stuff that makes sense to you does not make sense to a wider audience.
You see, most of the issues Total War has had is with its management. We got an ex-Total War developer coming out talking about how much of a disaster it was all the way back at Rome 2, and it seems like those things have just repeated themselves time and time again. They're trying to push things out faster than they can be made in. They're trying to add in details and add in features that developers just don't have time to put in. It's not necessarily down to a lack of talent or even resources, but a lack of time. And we saw that with all the Total War games coming out back to back, with Three Kingdoms, Warhammer 3, Troy, Pharaoh, all in very quick succession. They've basically had no time to breathe.
Okay, but like earlier in the video, you talked about how Pharaoh is no longer a Saga title, but a full-fledged title, implying that Saga titles. It implies that Saga titles are smaller releases requiring less investment in man-hours, which would, by its own logic, also mean that they had quite a bit of time to focus on the tentpole releases, which would be Warhammer 2, Three Kingdoms, what else was there? Warhammer 3. And on that point, let's not forget, Total War Warhammer 3 had 3 full years of development. You know, there was 3 full years between the release of Three Kingdoms and Warhammer 3, and even an even longer time between Warhammer 3 and Warhammer 2, and yet that game was an unmitigated disaster at launch. It's not that they didn't have the time, it's just that they just don't really seem to have a good idea for like anything.
And that was what happened with Troy and Pharaoh. These should have been the same game. This game should have come out instead of Troy, instead of Pharaoh. It should have been one title called Dynasties or Total War Dynasties. And it would have been fantastic. And I think it would have been received really, really well.
I agree that this is an appeal to, you know, popular reception or whatever. But I agree that it would have been received much better if they had delivered on having Mesopotamia in the game and other regions. And the Aegean, but it's also kind of concerning and sad that improving the game in the most superficial way possible is all that they really need to get to garner positive reception, without any meaningful changes to the gameplay, without solving stuff that's been a problem for years, like the battle AI.
And it's absolutely fantastic. Not only this, but on the Total War YouTube channels, they've been releasing up until the Dynasties release so many more developer blogs and interviews with the developers. We get to see their face. We get podcasts with them talking about their passion for the game, their ideas, the new features, and where they came from. The historical research and the resources pool that they've taken from in order to create this, well, I would say fantastic Total War game now.
I am more and more finding myself at a loss for words right now, because my dude, you are literally falling flat on your face for really obvious marketing techniques. If you've ever worked at a company, you'd know the devs would be highly unlikely to say anything that they think could jeopardize their jobs. Even if they don't have any written orders on what you can and can't say. Company culture is a thing, and company culture often has, when people have money, involved in the situation, there tends to be a chilling effect on what it is they're willing to divulge, especially to someone from the outside. So I really wouldn't put too much weight on what they're talking about in their videos.
There is a new combat feature called lethality, and this changes the way combat has really worked. I mean, now it doesn't matter what type of unit they are, you can get lucky kills and lucky blows upon your enemy. What I mean by that is, instead of just whittling an enemy down, if someone gets a lucky shot, they can take out another individual within one hit. So a lower level guy could take out an elite troop if he gets a lucky stab to the face. And they've added that mechanic to try and replicate that feature of real life within Total War. Now, of course, the more elite unit, the more likely they're going to get that lethality blow. The more peasant unit like these lads, it's very unlikely, but it is possible. So it's not just a complete back and forth of hitting and whittling people down. You can get lucky kills, you can get units that really come out on top just because they fought better that day. And I think that's a really, really cool addition.
Again, lethality really is not a new feature. It's misleading to call it that. It's a reskinning of the critical hits from Thrones of Britannia, which was just a poor reintroduction of something that was just standard fare in pre-Rome 2 games. And again, it messes up with height advantage. It solves one thing, like the lack of impact in charges and combat in general, and just creates this perverse interaction where height advantage just doesn't matter.
But look at all these units. Look at them. Look at... I mean, how long has it been since we wanted proper cavalry within a game again?
In conclusion, I think we can. I think it's pretty obvious that this is not the game-changing update that it's being touted as. In another time, it would have been just another update instead of a whole new edition that they can pretend is a new title as a feeble attempt to regain goodwill. In any case, I hope this was informative. I hope I've justified my claims for those of you who constantly have to bring up, oh, they brought more factions, oh, historical accuracy. Look, faction counts, inventory checks, I could not care less. They do not care about historical accuracy. They demonstrated time and time again that's not how they operate. It's just a marketing technique to draw in the historical fanboys, but clearly it doesn't seem to be working because they just don't exist. There's such a tiny minority on the internet complaining about, there's not this region or not that faction in the game, while there are much more pressing matters at hand. But anyway, thank you so much for watching. You can come by one of my Shogun 2 streams or check out one of my Shogun 2 videos or follow the Samurai. I also do multiplayer battle replays, and you can expect some more critiques from me as well. And I guess I will see you all next time. Let me know what you think. If I missed out, did I miss anything in the comments? Were there any punches that I held in this video? Please let me know. And thank you. Bye-bye.